let's think about what rights you have in a Kantian framework. I'm going to just take Kant's philosophy here as a given, since Bowie does, and think about whether this follows, not about whether Kant is right or wrong in the basic premises. So let's think about that. What rights do you have in a Kantian framework? The first formulation of the categorical imperative is to act only on that maxim you can at the same time will as a universal law. That gives you a right to be treated in a way that is comparable to the way everybody else is treated. You have a right to be judged by the same universal laws that apply to everyone else in your circumstance. So there's a condition of equal treatment here. Well, good, but now it's hard to see how my right to equal treatment entails anything about the level of my wages or my degree of autonomy or the possibility of my moral development or my pursuit of happiness, much less whether I am choosing this freely, maybe there, but on the other hand, in a situation of being a draftee, we might say, yes, I see how equal treatment is important. It's harder to see, just on that criterion alone, why any of these things would follow. But I don't think Bowie thinks they do, just from equal treatment alone. We have to look instead at the formula of humanity. There, the idea is that everybody has a right to be treated as an end in themselves rather than as means only. So I am not to be used merely as a means. I must be treated with respect. I must be treated as an end in myself. Does my right to be treated as an end in myself entail that I should be able to choose freely? Well, maybe it does. There might be certain obligations of citizenship, for example, that override that. But it would be plausible to think that on a Kantian conception, I really do have a right. Apart from maybe extreme emergencies or other things like that, I have a right to choose my own profession, to choose my own employment. And so it's plausible to say that that follows from a Kantian conception. What about the idea of autonomy? Kant does have a formula of autonomy that says we have to respect people's autonomy. But now we've got a tricky problem to deal with, because I enter into contracts all the time. I enter into employment contracts. I might, in business, enter into other kinds of contracts and agree to do a certain work for a certain price. I might, well, I have entered into a marriage contract. I'm married. That means I have certain commitments. Do I have a right to autonomy? Well, tell that to my wife, or tell that to my boss. Tell that to various people with whom I've made these kinds of commitments. We don't want to say that my right to autonomy is something that means that my job, a job that I've agreed to do, or constraints I've agreed to place on myself, become illegitimate in some way. And so here I think we have to draw a careful distinction. Autonomy in entering into that contract, but then autonomy within the terms of the contract. And it's clear that autonomy in terms of entering into the contract in the first place, that's something Kant would insist upon, yes. It's very close to that first condition then of freely entering into this. My entering into this employment contract should be a matter of my exercise of my autonomy. But now, within that contract, am I guaranteed some kind of autonomy, some freedom, some right to have problems delegated to me so that I can solve them independently? It doesn't seem so. If I've agreed to cut somebody's lawn, well, I've agreed to cut the lawn. If I've agreed to supply them with a certain number of chickens, if I've agreed to clean their cat's litter boxes while they're away on vacation, whatever it is, it may or may not allow me much autonomy and independence in the way I carry it out. Maybe there will be lots of autonomy, maybe very little. The terms of the contract should specify that. And so autonomy operates here at two levels, and it's clear that the first level, the level of autonomy in entering into the contract, does follow from a Kantian framework. Autonomy within it, much less clear. Presumably, one of my freedoms that I can select is to put myself under rules. Indeed, that's what being a member of the kingdom of ends is all about. I am to be a legislating member in the kingdom of ends, which means I get to choose the rules that I then have to live under. Autonomy is important in that I get to choose the rules. I get to choose to enter into that contract. But it doesn't specify what kind of contract I enter into or what kind of rules I agree to. What about the next criterion? Rational development. It seems plausible to say, well, look, Kant says rational nature exists as an end in itself. And so every rational being values necessarily his or her rationality. That means, in particular in this case, that my own rational development is something that I inherently value. Now, must my job promote it? I think it's plausible to say that people should not damage other people's rational development, damage them rationally. And so if I've got a job that is going to damage me, let's say I've agreed to, test products that are untested on humans before, and some of them might cause brain damage, oh yeah, that might be that might be a morally unacceptable job, an employment offer. On the other hand, does everything have to actually promote it? People watch television. They do it voluntarily, and a lot of it does not promote their rational capacities. And so there are various things that people do and voluntarily do that don't do this. Employment can be one of them. So in short, again, there's an external and an internal question. I shouldn't be interfered with. It shouldn't be something that damages my rational capacities. But does every job have to be educational? Does it have to be one that develops my rational capacities? Presumably no more than other activities I freely choose may or may not lead to the development of my rational faculties. Let's talk about the living wage. Does it follow from Kant's framework that I am owed a living wage? Well, again, it's not clear that I'm owed any wage at all. Would Kant really have a problem with unpaid internships, where I am trading my labor for something other than money, for some compensation that involves just greater knowledge of a certain industry I'm thinking about for a career, or a chance to work with so-and-so who I think is really terrific and I'd like to learn a lot from that person. I admire them greatly. Or maybe I'm an unpaid volunteer in a political campaign. I really want to get that candidate elected. What am I doing? It's very boring. I'm licking envelopes, making phone calls and asking people a few questions. It can be very dull, but on the other hand, I'm doing it because I value something else, even though I'm not developing my rational capacities, and even though I am not earning any kind of wage at all, let alone a living wage for that. And of course, apart from internships, there are all sorts of people who might accept a job that pays very little because it's the first step in the ladder. Maybe they just want to learn enough to get a job that will pay a living wage. They want a chance to rise. Or maybe it's someone who is just working, as I was that summer I was scrubbing those walls, for some extra money to help me get through college. But on the other hand, I didn't need a living wage. I just needed enough to supplement me so that I'd have enough cash to do things once I got to college. It wouldn't all be taken up by tuition, room, and board. And the same thing was true when I worked during summers. I knew lots of people, for that matter, who worked even during the school year as well as summer in high school, and they did it largely for extra spending money. They wanted to be able to put gas in the car or go to a movie or buy a record album. They didn't really care about earning a living wage. That wasn't the point. What about moral development? Well, again, Kant certainly would not like the idea of a job that damaged somebody's moral development. But on the other hand, does everything have to promote your moral development? Well, we want to develop, let's say, rationally and ideally morally, so it's a good thing for a job to do that. But it's the same issue, really, as with rational capacities. We'd want to say that a job shouldn't interfere with them. That doesn't mean it has to promote them. Now, it has to leave room for the development of that, but that might be just because it takes only a certain number of hours of the day. You can pursue your own moral and intellectual development after hours. Or maybe it just has you doing boring tasks, but you can think about questions. You can think about moral dilemmas all you want while you scrub those white vinyl walls or while you put new tires on cars, etc., etc. So all of those things strike me as, well, plausible in a certain way, but not actually imposing much of a constraint. Does it follow from Kant's framework that a job should not interfere with an employee's pursuit of happiness? Well, I don't recall anything like the pursuit of happiness entering into Kant's thinking at all. Now, he does think we pursue happiness, and so, in a sense, again, it's a desirable thing to give us an opportunity to pursue happiness. But is this something that a job is required to do? It's not very clear to me at all. If I have a right to be treated as an end in myself, does that mean allowing me to pursue happiness in my own way, either on the job or off the job? I'm not sure. Maybe it's a job where I have to be on call all the time. Maybe I'm a software engineer and I'm involved in setting up new software systems for various companies. I have to be on call whenever that's happening because problems arise, bugs are found. I need to be ready 24/7. That's going to be something that interferes with my pursuit of happiness. Does that mean that's an immoral job? No. The same thing might be true if I'm a medical professional. I'm somebody who is a specialist, the only specialist in the metropolitan area in a certain kind of field. If somebody's injured and needs that kind of specialty, even if it's 3 a.m., I'm going to get a phone call. Does that mean that this is an immoral position? I should never have accepted it? No. That's the sort of thing that I'm buying into. And so you might say, look, again, I have to be autonomous, but that's primarily an external question. I have to willingly do this. I have to exercise my autonomy by entering into this employment contract. That doesn't specify the terms of the contract. And it doesn't indicate anything about whether I'm going to have time to pursue happiness on the side, whether this is going to make it hard for me to pursue happiness, interfere with that, or substitute some other conception of happiness for my own. Maybe that I long to be just lying on a South Seas beach, but instead I'm in the middle of New York City negotiating deals. Or I'm waiting for that 3 a.m. phone call. That's something that goes with the territory, and as long as I chose the job, it seems to me Kant would have no problem with it. All of these things seem desirable. So it's a good thing for people to have them, but are they things that people can claim as rights? Now here it is not very clear, I think, what to say. If you look at the various kinds of things that Bowie recommends, again, they seem like good things. I don't want to criticize them. They're very good things. So, what are some of those things? He talks about employment security, selective recruiting, high wages, talks about incentive pay, employee ownership, information sharing, participation and empowerment, teams and job redesign, training and skill development, cross-utilization and cross-training, symbolic egalitarianism, wage compression, by which he means not the kind of phenomenon we have in academia where staying there a long time penalizes you, but rather not allowing the person who's at the top of the company to earn vastly more than the person who's at the bottom. Promotion from within, a long-term perspective, measurement of practices, and an overarching corporate philosophy. Again, all those things are good things. And so it's not as if I want to criticize any management practice that says these are good things to pursue, these are good things to institute. Of course they are. But the question is whether people have a right to them, whether in some way this is something that employees can claim as an entitlement. And that seems to me much less clear. In fact, when I think about a lot of the examples in Bowie, I'm struck by the fact that they're very class-centric. They apply to a certain kind of job. But I think in thinking about the employment relationship, we need to think about a much broader range of jobs. What are we going to say about garbage collectors, for example, bus drivers, steel workers, iron workers, plumbers, electricians, accounting clerks, people whose job is as a security guard or a prison guard, a police officer? What do we say about positions like that? Do we want to say that the head of the collection firm, the sanitation firm, has to dress like a garbage collector? That person who's collecting garbage needs to wear a suit and tie? What do we want to say about a water utility, where, yes, some people are in the main office handling the accounting, making the executive decisions, but other people are out there actually laying pipe into the ground, are actually there crafting the engineering systems. Presumably those people all dress differently. They earn very different amounts of money. Why should we think that any of this stuff really applies? Should there be cross-training? Should we take the people who are digging the trenches with the heavy machinery and put them in the accounting office for a while? Take the accountants and send them out and ask them to operate a backhoe? A lot of this seems to me to apply only within a certain range of job. Now, admittedly, all of those things are desirable things, and to the extent that they can be implemented in other kinds of jobs, that's probably a good thing. But it doesn't seem as if there's any right to them, and in fact it seems as if sometimes it's really implausible to think that they could be done at all.